Well, in implementing the Cornerstone values approach to character education, the first thing to remember is there's no set script. There are only principles. So you're not going to get a set of strategies that you're going to follow A, B, C, D. So that in different schools, there'll be a lot of similarities, but there'll be a lot of differences. But you will have to attend to the teaching content. You will have to include the elements of the head, the hand and the heart, the tying together of attitudes, knowledge and behaviour. You will have to ensure that your approach informs and directs everything that happens in a school. You will have to remember that the key is culture and the relationships within the school, and above all, you will remember the importance of principle-centred leadership, and particularly from the school principal and those who exercise senior positions or have responsibilities, senior responsibilities. The best advice is this: begin with the end in mind. You've probably heard the story of the man who went to a funeral, and as he neared the building where the funeral was being held, he recognised that the people going in were very familiar to him. He took his place in the back, and the funeral proceeded, and there were 4 eulogies. The first person spoke of the deceased's contribution to his family. The second person who spoke talked of the deceased in terms of his relationships with his colleagues. The third talked about him in terms of his leadership in the community, and the fourth talked about him and his faith community. Now, our friend realised that what he was attending was his own funeral, and that these 4 people making the eulogies were summarising his life, his contribution, what he was leaving, in essence, his character. So the lesson is, begin with the end in mind. If you want those things said in the eulogies at your funeral, you have to begin a long way back. So it's important for a school contemplating implementing the Cornerstone values approach to begin with the end in mind and visualise the type of school, culture and environment and relationships that it wants to create. Now, to assist in that exercise, there is a little workshop that's available that suggests that you imagine an exemplary school in terms of character education. What would you see? What would you find written? What would the practices be like? And so on. And by working as a staff through those 7 questions, you're able to begin to create a vision of what could be. Now, you end up then with a vision statement that has life, that's rooted somewhere, is not a meaningless statement posted on a wall someplace. So you need a vision of what could be. And then you need to start breaking it down into some manageable stages. I always suggest that you have a strategic planning committee, which must include the principal and the teachers and the trustees and the parents. And so that group starts to build the broad picture, the broad plan. And it needs to address some very critical questions. And the first one that it needs to address before it can even start the implementation of the curriculum statement of values and attitudes, or attitudes and values, is to determine whether there are core values or whether there are no core values. Because if there are no core values, the school's approach will be vastly different from the school's approach if it believes that there are core values. Now, the two are mutually exclusive and you can't mix and match. So that decision has to be made. So you're planning the way forward. Why should the school teach values? What will the goals be? And how will we teach them? I want to suggest that there are two goals that a school would consider. There are two reasons. Do you want to restore to the school what the school has lost in terms of its culture? Or do you want to conserve the culture that the school already has? Now, that model of conservation or restoration will provide a very useful framework for the school as it plans. Below the strategic planning group, you need another group, planning teams, who are looking for more detail, drawing up action plans. And you need to then move on to the individual teacher who will be responsible for delivering the approach in the classrooms, which, when all is said and done, is the critical area. Now, again, in that whole exercise, communication is important. It should be open. The communication should model the values that the school is going to seek to promote. Critics' arguments should be answered honestly and with dignity. In responding to the critics, you should again model the values that you are on about. And finally, in terms of communicating with the parents, which is essential, and with the wider community, their principal has a key role that cannot be undertaken by anyone else. So again, the principle is critical. Now, once you've decided on your approach, stick with it. You know, sometimes schools are like monarch butterflies. They flit from bush to bush. They flit from this strategy to that strategy, from this resource to that resource, from this approach to that approach. And the result is that they get nowhere, because monarch butterflies have a short life, but they also have a short shelf life. And it's not very long before the school is looking for the next monarch butterfly to come into view. So you stick with the approach. One of the first things to do is to consult the parents. Ask the parents for their views. And to do this, the Cornerstone Values Parent Survey has been drawn and constructed to enable a school to get quantitative information about some very specific areas. The first area is, what kind of a person does the parent want their child to become? See, that is a key question, and it's a key question for young people. What kind of a person do I want to be? What kind of a person am I becoming? Next question, what importance do parents place on a school teaching character or values? And if a school is to teach values, which values or character traits or virtues should the school emphasise? And fourthly, an unrelated but a very useful question, what inclination would you have to send your child to a school if it did teach the Cornerstone Values approach to character education? Now, That is a very useful device, and many schools have used it. It's important to work out how you're going to communicate with parents. And the key here is the school newsletter and also a home activity sheet that goes with the Cornerstone Values approach, was suggested. Because once you're communicating effectively with the parents, the school will find that they become the greatest supporters. Two other things that a school should do. The first is to draw up a code of conduct for the students. Not a set of rules, but a code of conduct that reflects the core values that the school is promoting. A code of conduct that sets out a guide to acceptable and unacceptable behaviour, and also acts as a guide to what the social expectations of the school are. But if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. The students have a code of conduct, then the staff should have a code of ethics. Because students are entitled to observe staff exhibiting good character and character traits or cornerstone values. Because that code of ethics will also be an opportunity to model, because the truth is that adults teach by what they are. Finally, if you're going to implement the Cornerstone Values approach, evaluation is very important. I mentioned earlier, we do best those things that we measure. The best way to assess whether or not the approach is effective in your school is simply to ask, what does character, or what do Cornerstone Values look and sound like in the school? Now, the sound is very important because they tell us a great deal about what really is happening in the school. So it's not difficult to draw up a short questionnaire for people to ask and observe about the behaviours going on in the school. Second thing to do is very important, and that is to gather hard data, particularly hard data about behaviours that are of a concern to a school. It could be absenteeism, it could be bullying, it could be vandalism, it could be drunkenness, it could be teen pregnancy, it could be knives at school, it could be any number of things. And that will vary from school to school. But it's very important to start off and document the incidents of those behaviours. And then in 6 months, document them again. And in 6 months again, so you can track those key indicators in your school through the gathering of hard data. School suspensions be another. And finally, the use of structured surveys has a great deal to recommend itself, because there's a little more objectivity coming in here. The Character Education Partnership in Washington have drawn up a paper which they call the 11 Principles of Effective Character Education. Now, this is a very good guide to an effective approach. Thomas Lincona has drawn up an instrument for profiling a school in terms of those 11 values. Now, I would highly recommend a school using that survey. What does our school look like in terms of those 11 principles? And the second structured survey is another one drawn up by Dr. Thomas Lincona, is profiling the school as a caring community. Now, together, those methods will give you a very accurate assessment or evaluation of what is happening in your school. To assist schools deliver this value at a time, whether it's by one a month or one a term, I've designed a desktop planner. Now on this, through words and symbols, I have reminded the teacher or the group of teachers or the school of all the elements that they should be considering as they deliver this values precept. For example, in the centre there, I've got silhouettes of the head, the hand and the heart. Now, as you work round this grid, you are reminded of the elements that ought to be included, like the lead lesson, like the literature, like the school assembly, like the communication to parents through the newsletter and the home worksheet and so on. So that is an aid that makes the task of the teacher a little less burdensome and ensures that there is continuity and comprehensiveness.